Perfect. So welcome everyone to the monthly Laser Pro webinar. So today's topic is going to be on pre-builds and takeoff templates. So these may be features that you're already potentially using in your business, but today I want to go over what each of them are, what the purpose for each of them is, how to create them, and what some of the settings within each of them are, and how that could have implications or flow-on effects when you're then, say, using a pre-build in a quote or a job. And then I guess the most important thing, in my opinion, is how do we update them and maintain them on an ongoing basis? Just because they're there and we use them, how do we then update the pricing or parts behind one of these items as we move into the future? So I'm going to share my screen and let's jump into it. Hopefully everyone can see that okay. So I'm going to give a brief overview first of all on what is a pre-build and a takeoff template. So the way I like to categorize pre-builds is it's an amalgamation of parts and labor, potentially, for one line item. So if we think about a quote, job, or invoice, it might say supply and installation of whatever it might be, whether you're electrical or plumbing based. So that's what the end customer sees. So they see one line item, but behind it, it has that full breakdown or amalgamation of those parts and labor. There is some different terminology that I've heard throughout the industry and different products on the market. Some call them kit assemblies. Laser Pro's terminology is pre-builds. So that's what that one is. And then a takeoff template is still an amalgamation of parts, but it doesn't end up being one item to the end customer's view if they're looking at a quote, job, or invoice. So we can group parts together if we know that we need to use them in that sense quite often. We know that to do this type of installation, we need these 10 parts. So we can build them into categories to make it easier for, say, when someone's trying to build a quote or a job, but it's not going to show that single line item. It's going to show each of those 10 items and their quantities depending on what type of form we choose. So I'll show you what they look like. So if we come into our pre-builds first, and I may have stolen a bunch of pre-builds from someone else's system yesterday to show you yesterday. So we've got all of our groups and subgroups here, which is really helpful just for navigation and keeping things tidy. So I do recommend trying to create groups and subgroups where you can. But if I click into, say, the top one, we do have a couple of pre-builds here. And if I click into vanity fittings, we've got our pre-build. So I'll explain what all of these buttons are in a second. But if I go into the build tab of a pre-build, it has all of my catalog items. So this is what I was referring to when we've got the amalgamation of parts. So these are all the parts that sit behind it from our point of view on the quote, job, invoice, and from when we're doing a purchase order. But that's not what the customer's going to see. So we can still do all of our full job costings without having to show someone else all of the nitty gritty, so to speak. So if I come back to my details tab, so just have a bit of an overview of what this screen is giving us and showing us. So we've got the pre-build name, a pre-build part number. If we want to put in a part number, I probably would recommend trying to do that where you can, just so that way it's clear that there's no duplicates or double ups. If it's a favorite pre-build, the pre-build description and the notes, which are private and aren't visible outside of Laser Pro. And then the most important area is probably this pricing breakdown down the bottom. So we've got two different pre-build options here. We've got a standard price pre-build or a flat rate pre-build. And so this is actually a toggle and we can toggle between it. So a standard price pre-build is going to have all of these options below: materials, labor, cost, sell. We can put specific markups on the different components of it there, whether it's material or labor. If I change this to a flat rate price pre-build, all of those options disappear and we just have a flat sell rate across the board in terms of time, and we can put time in terms of price, and we can put time on it as well if we do think it's going to take us X time to complete that or finish that service. So this can be helpful. I would just be mindful that if you do use flat rate pre-builds, they're not necessarily going to update the price on their own, and that is something manual that you'll have to keep across as inflationary increases happen or as material prices go up. These sell prices aren't going to update on their own because it doesn't have anything to pull from, because it's not linked to any material costs at the moment. So I'll loop back around to that at the end just to hit that message home, because I do think it's important. Sometimes it's a bit out of sight, out of mind, and we may not remember to update them. But if we come back to our standard price, pre-build, we've got our material cost based on build. So if we tick based on build, what that's correlating to now is our build tab at the top with all of the items against it. So if we say cost based on build, it's going to pull the cost based on all of my catalog items. So the price as per the catalog. Now, if I unticked that for any reason and I overrode that price, as the catalog items do or don't update, depending on if you have automations turned on with certain suppliers, or if there's any other suppliers in the system that don't have auto updates available. If we untick this, it's not going to change by itself. So again, something to be mindful of if we're changing some of these settings, that the system isn't going to do things automatically for us. Below that, we've got the material cell. Again, we've got based on defaults as a tick box. So what this is correlating to is our material pricing tiers that we have in the system setup. So depending on whether you have a flat percentage markup, or whether, say, you have scaled pricing enabled on the pricing tier, what this is going to do is this says based on defaults. Okay, we don't have one in here, so it's at 0. But say for $70 odd, the markup's going to be 50%. Whatever the system setup is, it's going to pull that number in and automatically generate the markup for you. So this is helpful if you do have this ticked, if you are going to then be updating your material pricing tiers in the future. So that way, if you update the pricing tier and say the scaled pricing, it's going to flow through to things like pre-builds automatically without you having to go into each and every one and potentially manually change it and update it. The next one is sell based on build. So if we do have all of these ticked, we've got our cost based on build, got our sell based on defaults, and then we've got sell based on build. It's going to do the maths for us. But I don't have a percentage. I don't have a percentage at the moment, so it's not going to spit out my number for me. But it can then generate the cost percentage sell for us, and it can auto update ongoing. If we keep moving down, we've got our labor now. So we've got labor time based on defaults. So this is if we have fit times assigned to catalog items. So if I come back to my build tab in here, we've got this column here called time minutes, and it says next to it fit time. If for any reason we do allocate time or fit times to the items in the catalog, then it will calculate and amalgamate those together based on what we've got in the build tab and add the total in here for us. So if we aren't using that, we can untick it and put in our own time measure. So if we want to say 60 minutes, we can do that ourselves. That is very dependent on those fit times. I have seen people use them in the past, but depending on how big your catalog is, that might be quite a big job to go and update those. So if for any reason you don't want to do that, we can just untick it. We would just have to monitor that if we did want to reassess if something was taking us longer or shorter into the future. If we go below that again, so labor rates are based on defaults. So if we have this ticked, it's going to pull the cost based on our default labor rate in our system setup. Now, I have had people question this in the past because we can only have one default labor rate, which is probably generically a fully qualified tradesman rate. But depending on what the pre-build's for, we might want a slightly different industry rate, apprentice rate, customer specific rate, whatever it might be. It depends what the pre-build purpose is for. But the based on defaults tick is only going to pull from whichever one is the default in the system setup and pull the cost based on that. So if you don't want to pull your default because that's not applicable in this pre-build scenario, then I probably would recommend unticking it just because we can only have that one. And then it will ungray the boxes and we can manually change it. But again, I will keep saying this a lot today. You have to be mindful, I guess, of the maintenance, and we will get to that at the end, and I'll show you some tips and tricks on how to keep across that and keep an eye on where these are looking. But I guess what am I trying to say? The more we untick these boxes, the more you have to keep across things. If we can keep tick boxes there where applicable, then I guess the system's going to do more legwork for us, which is helpful, but it's going to come down to personal preference and pre-build purpose. It's probably the best way to describe it. And once we've filled out all of these on the left in terms of the material and labor cost and sell, it will then give us our breakdown over here of cost, markup, profit, margin, etc. And then we've got the total price down the bottom. And we have a very nice visual graph to show us exactly where we're sitting on this pre-build. So if I change this back to flat rate now, and we remove all of those options, so we've got based on build 60, and then in here we can just put in a lump sum sell price. So whatever we want to put in, and again, it will do the maths for us. I'm just going to hit save on that. Is there any questions so far? If you do have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat, or I'll try and allow some Q&A time at the end if we want to loop back around. Perfect. I will keep going. If we get out of this pre-build, the next thing that I want to show you is a takeoff template. So if I come into takeoff templates at the top, and I did create one yesterday, one that I've prepared earlier. So if we come into a takeoff template, we do have less options or tabs in here. So we've got our details tab, which shows us all of our the name of the takeoff template, the parts that we've added already, and the quantity in the cell, and then our breakdown of costs. But in terms of, I guess, if we come into the parts and labor tab, it looks slightly different to a parts and labor, slightly similar to a parts and labor tab in a quote or a job. And we can adjust any costings where we need to. Now, with a takeoff template, we can pull items from other takeoff templates, pre-builds, catalog items, or create a one-off item into a takeoff template, which would then, I guess, as we apply the template, add to every quoted job that the template's applied to. So something where I probably would try not to use one-off items where possible. Potentially, if you wanted to put consumables or something that you're not necessarily going to actually order. Other than that, we don't need to, that's a different tangent. We don't need to go into my thoughts on one-off items today. So if we come in here, I've come in and added some catalog items yesterday. What am I trying to say? If we come back to the details tab, so I was saying earlier that the pre-build shows that one line item. But if we added this takeoff template to a quota job, it's going to show me each of these five line items and the relevant quantities. So what I see a lot of people do is create a takeoff template and they might put the actual quantities on. So say 10, 5, whatever it might be. Or I have seen other people use it in the sense of they leave everything as quantity 1, So that way it tells them which items they need, but then it's up to them to figure out how many of each quantity they need for that specific quote or job. So potentially helpful if maybe you have someone that's newer to quoting or estimating in the business and maybe isn't as familiar with all of the parts that might be required for certain things yet, can take out some of, I guess, that guessing or legwork. They have the items in front of them and then they can just adjust the quantities or pricing as they need to, but at least they're not potentially forgetting items as well. So I'm just going to hit save and finish on that. And now if I come into a quote, I can use an old quote. I'll just add a new cost center so it's nice and clean. All right, if we come into our parts and labor tab to a quote or a job, now if I come into my pre-builds and I add the one that we were looking at earlier, and I add my quantity, we have that one single line item view from the billable component here. So this is what the customer is going to see if we generate any itemized the prices, itemize the quantity, quote job inputs. If you use the description type for any reason, less relevant because they're not going to see the breakdown of parts anyway. But if I now change to my takeoffs and come into general and add my stormwater one that I prepared earlier, it now has all of my items there. So there is a bit of a difference, and I guess they do have slightly different purposes, both relevant, but it's just going to come down to how you want to use it. I do see people use pre-builds more than takeoff templates. So I do think takeoff templates are slightly underutilized. So if you would like to use them more, now is the time. I'll just pause and see if there is any questions. Wonderful. So what I'm going to show you now is in terms of the maintenance of a pre-build or takeoff template. I might actually start with takeoff templates first because it's a bit easier to explain, and then I'll loop back around to pre-builds. So with takeoff templates, we can't unfortunately import these into the system via CSV. So that like catalogs and pre-builds in other areas, we can import them and create them in bulk. Unfortunately, takeoff templates doesn't have that option. So we do need to manually create them and then as such, update them. So if we come into the takeoff template area, you would have to click create. And if for any reason a catalog item was no longer whether it's obsolete or whether it's just we're not using that item anymore and we want to replace it with a new item in a takeoff template sense, we would need to come in here and manually change it, which is not ideal, but that is the current functionality, just because we don't have any options to bulk update in a takeoff sense. Now with pre-builds, slightly more complicated. So there is some functionality in Laser Pro that I will show you now. I'm just going to quickly read Anthony's question. To answer you, Anthony has a great question. So takeoff templates can also be used as a checklist while you're doing a quote. Would you just remove items for anything you do not want in the quote? Absolutely. So if we say are thinking about a new home build, we could put in anything that we could potentially use on a new home build, and we add the takeoff template to say the quote, and then you can remove items, individual items that you don't need anymore, and yeah, or adjust quantities and do what you need to. Once the takeoff is in the quote, you can do what you like. It's just more getting all of those items onto the quote in the first place. We don't have to go look for those 20, 30 items individually and potentially forget or miss something. We've pre-built that, everything's there, and we can adjust it accordingly. But you're absolutely right, you can remove any items if you need to. Perfect. Coming back to what I was saying, so pre-build maintenance. So LaserPro has some really great functionality in terms of how we can update pre-builds, and this is LaserPro specific. So general SimPro customers don't have this, so you are unique in that sense. So if I come over and hover over my utilities menu, we've got this option down the bottom called Prebuild Item Replace. Now, if I click on that, what it lets us do is search a catalog item, click Find Prebuilds that have this specific item in it. Okay, it hasn't found any. Let's go find a pre-build. We'll see if this works. So what we can do is search for the catalog part number. It'll say, show me all of the pre-builds that this item is in, and then we can choose to what item we want to replace it with. So we can bulk update pre-builds within this screen. Now, I guess identifying that in the first place can be slightly more difficult, depending on how large your catalog is. So there is, if I come back to, we'll open a new tab. If I come into a catalog item, at random, we do have this under attributes. We've got our favorites and we've got inventory, and we've got these later too that probably aren't as commonly used as they could be. So the one that I wanted to talk about today is this obsolete tick box. So this is a LaserPro specific feature where if we're going through our catalog and we identify that we don't want to use this item anymore, whether it's because the supplier stopped selling it because it's obsolete from their point of view, or it's obsolete from our point of view in the sense that we don't want to use this item anymore and we want to identify this, what we can do is tick this as obsolete, click Save and Finish. And then if we come into our reports area, under custom reports, we've got this obsolete items report at the top here. And if I click search and just go all, we could filter it to just what's in pre-builds, but I don't have any in pre-builds at the moment. It can show me all of the part numbers that have obsolete items linked to it. And then it's going to show me how many pre-builds it's in. And I guess the purpose of this is then you would take this, and I would recommend doing 2 screens doing this exercise. You would have this on one screen, and then on your second screen, you could have that pre-build item replaced. And then you could go search for the part number and then replace it with the new part number that you want to use moving forward. So it is a multi-step process, but it is quite efficient in that we're making sure that we're not then selling pre-builds with old items in it or old pricing in it because the item has just stopped updating because the supplier is not selling it anymore. So we're selling something based on an old price. So it is a really great little workflow and maintenance hack that not everyone probably knows about. But if we could utilize the obsolete items feature with the obsolete items report and the pre-build item replace, that is the most efficient way to update your pre-builds. Now, there are other ways, but they're slightly more manual and complex. So when I worked at SimPro and not all customers had this feature, the only other way that I know of is to manually export your pre-build through a CSV. And then you have to do a lot of Excel wizardry or manipulation, lots of VLOOKUP formulas to compare, is this item still in my catalog, active catalog, versus what's in the pre-builds. It's possible, but it is quite clunky, and I guess room for error because we're then taking things out of the system, looking at spreadsheets, and obviously then you need to know how to run a formula to do the comparison. So it is this is the best way, utilizing the Laser Pro specific functionality, in my opinion. It is the easiest and cleanest way to make sure that things don't get missed or overlooked. The other thing that I will show you, if I come back to my custom reports tab, so that's if we want to update and do the ongoing maintenance moving forward. But I guess just to keep an eye on the pre-builds and holistically just check where things are at. If we come into our custom reports tab again, we've got this pre-build details report at the top here on the just next to the obsolete one. So if I hit search, what this is going to do is show me all of my pre-builds and all of the cost breakdowns and whether it's a standard price or this says set price, but it means flat rate. The terminology is a bit off between the pre-build and the report here, but set price is a flat rate. So what we can do is then put it, say, in margin order or whatever we want to filter it by. I generally look at margin just to see which ones am I making negative or no margin on. But this is a really great way to keep across it, especially if we have those auto update or based on default build ticked as the catalog automations or suppliers are doing their thing and prices are going up and down. If we have the costs auto updating, but maybe not the sell for some reason, well, we can keep an eye on it and say, okay, is our margin getting smaller? Do we need to have a look at this and review the price? Something to that effect. We do have the price type over here, but you can change it in the filter as well if we wanted to say see only set price. So that way, if we did want to look at this on a probably quarterly basis, I would recommend, just because they are set price and depending on what the pre-builds are for. If they're customer specific, maybe we don't need to update them. Maybe if it's a contract to some degree and we've got the costings listed in there, maybe we don't need to, but for more generic ones, I'd probably just run your eye over it once a quarter, just to make sure that things are still looking okay and seeing if we need to make any small tweaks or changes. Ron has a question, is the margin based on net or gross? That is a great question. It doesn't indicate in this report. Let me go, because this is a Laser Pro specific feature, Ron, there'll be a scope document somewhere, which will list exactly what all these columns are for. So let me go find that document and I will clarify for you, because actually I could probably just open this and compare. 33. I'll just look at the scope. That's probably a bit more clear. We'll make sure we're exact. I'll just make a note of that though. Perfect. Is there any questions around the reports, whether that's the obsolete report or the pre-build details report?
Yeah, hi, Caitlin, Ron here. Just to be wary, if you are using Ground Plan and it's integrated with Laser Pro, and you do use that find and replace option, it can not so much break the connection, but be looking at a different set of...
It doesn't break the connection. I know what you're talking about, Ron. So that is correct. I will put a disclaimer on that. If you do use the pre-build item replace under utilities, the way that Ground Plan works with the Laser Pro integration is it looks at a pre-build ID. We can't visibly see the ID, but it allocates an ID in the background. And when we utilize this feature, instead of replacing it from our point of view, it looks like it's replaced. But what it actually does is generates a new ID in the background. So if you do use Ground Plan for any reason, just be mindful that it'll generate a new ID, and that's how it maps with Ground Plan. So you would then need to remap the pre-build on the other end. So there is a bit of a flow-on effect there. I do think it's still a worthy exercise to do. Just be aware of the implications, and if there are any issues, have a chat to your BPM, or Ground Plan can help you as well. Just out of curiosity, I know there's probably not all of the members on the call, but how many on this call use ground plan while we're on the topic? We have a yes. That's promising. Okay. Okay, we've got quite a few, but that's good. This is a side topic, but would you want a ground plan specific webinar or a ground plan and Laser Pro integration type webinar, how they correlate with each other? Because I'm currently planning one for Australia and I'm actually talking to ground plan tomorrow. So if Laser is interested in, we can come up with content, do the same thing. Just thought I'd see if there was interest before I talk to them. Perfect. There's lots of interest. So I'm going to go with a big yes on that one. So stay tuned. I will chat to Ron and we will get something booked in soon on that front. Hopefully that's okay with you, Ron. I just hijacked
Absolutely.
the next topic.
Great idea. Fantastic.
All right. If you have any other questions, please feel free to unmute yourself or put them in the chat. That is the extent of the topic for today, or the content at a high level. But if you do want me to repeat anything or have any questions, feel free to stay on. But otherwise, I will let you get back to your day.
Anthony here, Caitlin. Question, when you do the replace items and it substitutes them, do you have to go into that build and the item and set unit of measurement, purchasing stage, all of those ID things, or you have to manually go in and replace all of those?
Please refresh my memory. Where are you talking about in terms of the unit?
So when you go into the item itself within the build, then into the item, and you have a unit of measurement, purchasing stage, trade price.
You mean in the catalog item?
Yes, in the catalog items. So in that build, and then you click individual line items.
That is set on the catalog item itself. So if we're replacing it with one item with another item, as long as the second item has units of measurement purchasing stage on it, it will replace it with whatever that is.
Okay. Thank you.
So that, yeah, that's more catalog specific as opposed to the pre-build per se. Perfect. Any last questions? Otherwise, I'll let you get back to your day.